it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. When one looks long into the abyss, they may find the abyss looking back. Friedrich Nietzsche. I once saw people getting murdered. Thing was, I saw it happening through someone else's eyes. By Corpse Child. I thought they were just weird dreams at first. You know, just one of those instances where you have a vivid dream, one that you'd swear was real, only to wake up and say, no, none of that shit happened. Go back to bed. We've all had those, right? I know I did anyways, back in the day. Of course, they were usually far more innocent and benign. A bit wacky, actually. Like the one where I'm attending a comedy show, but with Muppets being the comedians, and the actual people taking their place as the ventriloquist dummies. This, though, well, this is nothing like that. Something I realized later on. I think I was maybe 16 or 17 when it first happened. Remember, it was a Friday night. I'd just gotten home from cheerleading at the football game. Everything had gone all nice and smooth, even managing to get a little under the bleachers time with my crush at the time, Danny Rudd, after the game. And I was ending the night with a nice hot soak in the tub. My folks were out for the night, so I had the house to myself. I remember feeling so relaxed, lying in the piping hot water, my head rested back and my eyes closed. And I was asleep before I even knew it. I guess that's what got me, really, at first. The fact I didn't know I was actually asleep. I just remember 1 minute, everything's all fine, and the next, I'm seeing Danny being repeatedly stabbed. Well, it was abrupt. All of a sudden I was seeing Danny splayed out across the ground in a dark room, one I couldn't make out any real features of, while a knife was being plunged into his chest over and over. Danny was convulsing violently, coughing up a fountain of blood. The last thing I saw was him slowly, shakily raise his arm, pleading for mercy as the knife came down again. That's when I started, violently in the bathtub, almost springing straight to my feet. That caused me to slip and crack my head against the wall. Well, I was fine, save obviously a bitch of a headache, but I was shaken up much worse with what had just happened. It was almost 4 o'clock the next morning before I was actually able to fall asleep, constantly tossing and turning. Every time I tried closing my eyes, I'd see Danny's beaten, bloodied face reaching out to me. To him, whoever it was holding the knife. See, that was another thing. I didn't know exactly what it was I was seeing. In other words, I couldn't tell if I just imagined it was me stabbing him, or if it was something else. Well, for the record, I'm not the kind of girl who'd fantasize some shit like that, getting my rocks off and killing my crush or anybody else for that matter. I wasn't then, and I'm not now. I'm not a violent person either. Hell, I've only gotten into fistfights and hair-snatching matches with my older sister, Megan. But then, well, what the hell was that? At the time, I answered that question with a classic, too much binging Dateline late at night excuse. I'd have probably stuck to that too, except that the next morning, a breaking news report came on about a high school student being reported missing only a few hours ago. And of course, who else's photo and name appears but Danny's? Witnesses say the missing boy, Daniel Preston Rudd, was last seen at a varsity football game at West Lincoln High. At this time, witnesses claim they didn't remember seeing him leave. Authorities are continuing to search the area. If you've seen Daniel or have any leads as to his whereabouts, we urge you to call and submit an anonymous tidbit. I turned the TV off. My stomach was cutting backflips. My heart was beating stupidly fast. Oh, calm down, I told myself. He's fine, and you know it. He probably just went to the bar or something and got shit-faced and forgot to tell one of his buddies to drive him home or something. Well, causing his mom, who just worries about everything, to call the police, thinking he'd been kidnapped or something. No, he'll be fine. This managed to at least get me to slow down enough to breathe properly again. Still, though, I couldn't stop thinking of the dream from last night. Again, aside from how real it felt, that's the only way I know how to describe it. Real. It's also completely out of left field. And now this, needless to say, my anxiety was well through the roof all day that day. I couldn't sit still, constantly pacing around, wondering what could have happened to him. Not only that, but I was also in a frenzy, wondering what, if anything, was I supposed to do. Felt like I was supposed to be out there searching for him. Finally, I worked up the guts to get up and start driving around, looking all around town for him. Well, the first place I looked, naturally, was the school parking lot. The news said no one saw him leave. I drove into the parking lot, and there it was, Danny's dad's Volkswagen, still parked in the middle of the student lot, purposefully in between two of the parking spaces, something he thought made him look cool. Of course, there were cops there as well, and obviously they weren't keen on the idea of me poking around there either. Oh, being the badass bitch I thought I was back then, I told the officers exactly where they could shove it before attempting to run past them, only to be promptly caught and told to go back to my car and get off the campus or take a ride to the station with them, where they'd have to call Mom and Dad to come and bail me out. So I relented and went back to my car, flustered, making a point to flip them both barrels as I did. I was driving back home when it happened again. Well, this time I knew for a fact I'd not fallen asleep either. This time it was someone else from school, Sarah Keller, the captain of the cheerleading squad. She was hanging outside from the ceiling by her ankles, her hands tied behind her back. Just like Danny before, everything was dark, aside from what looked like a single lamp that illuminated her suspended body. Her mouth was duct-taped too, muffling her screams as I saw the hand from before approach her with a power drill tightly clutched in it, pointing downward. What the hell? I thought, my heart spiraling into yet another frenzy. I watched the power drill then get plunged downward, straight down into, oh God, in between her legs. I just briefly heard her muffled shrieks and saw a shower of blood as her body writhed before I was once again abruptly brought back to the real world. And because of this, I just narrowly avoided gift-wrapping myself around a telephone pole by swerving into the ditch. For a moment, I just sat there, hyperventilating. My entire body locked up, looking like a statue in the driver's seat. My hands were locked so tight around the steering wheel that my knuckles were the color of a piece of paper by the time I'd even noticed. My mind was locked in a three-way tie between wanting to A, throw the car in reverse and start panic searching for Sarah, B, put the car in reverse and book it straight back home and forget about all of this, hoping to God all the while that it really was just me losing it there, or C, curl into a pathetic ball in my car and cry out of sheer hysteria. Well, kind of what I was doing at that moment already. In the end, I'd end up electing option B. Yeah, I wanted to know that my classmates were safe, but at the same time, how did I know they actually weren't? Okay, yeah, Danny's missing, but then again, that didn't necessarily mean he's in danger, right? And the same thing with Sarah. I mean, she hadn't even been reported missing. Well, not yet. And like I said, I went straight home without anything else happening again. Regardless, I was still on the edge the entire time, so much so that I didn't even want to come out of my room the rest of the day. In fact, I couldn't even bring myself to get back up from my bed. My brain eventually became so overclocked with questions of what, how, and why the fuck that I ended up actually falling asleep simply from mental exhaustion. A power reset, essentially. At first, everything was fine, I guess. No vivid nightmares or any weird dreams. Actually, I didn't dream at all, something that was typical for me. Suddenly, though, out of the frickin' blue again, I saw a new one. This one was of my lab partner in biology class, Francine Simmons. Already, despite being in what I prayed was just some fuck-to-hell nightmare, I could feel my stomach start to turn over on itself. Oh, dear God, no. Please, not again. Not another one. This time, though, I faintly noticed two things to be different. The first was that the location was different. While I couldn't really tell with the other two, I still remembered their killings taking place in a dark room, like maybe a cellar or a basement or something. Not this one, though. Francine's was taking place outside. I still couldn't see where exactly because it was nighttime out, but I knew it was outside because of the trees that I saw surrounding the area of wherever this was apparently taking place, one of which Francine was tied to. And this brings me to the other thing that made this one different from the other two, the way in which it was being done. I'll say right now that this one sticks out to me a bit more than the other times, even now. She was nude, bruises and cuts covering just about every square inch of her body. She was also suspended in the air, similar to how Sarah was, only she appeared suspended off the ground by her wrists and neck, and arranged in a crucifixion pose, her legs dangling freely down. In the killer's hand was a wooden Louisville slugger, and this made my heart stop. No. Francine's eyes were glazed, yet still I could see the cold panic in them, flooding through them and filtering down the rest of her battered body as the killer approached with the bat. I could see tears flood her eyes, but she didn't move. She couldn't move, not even to struggle. About 1.5 feet from her, I saw the bat swing swiftly, sending a crushing blow to Francine's stomach. Francine let out a strained, pitiful wheezing. Through all of this, I was screaming at myself to make this end, to wake the fuck up and make this all be over. But I couldn't. I couldn't wake up. I couldn't make it stop. I couldn't do anything except watch. Francine's body began convulsing, writhing against her restraints. Her eyes went wide with each crash of the bat against her. She began heaving, struggling to gasp for air. This time she was struck across her face, immediately dislocating her jaw. Her lower jaw now hung limply to the right, and I could hear her groan while still wheezing. And that was when I heard a sickening crack, and her head dangled limply. Her body relaxed, hanging freely from the tree limb. She was gone. Well, this wasn't the end, though. Unlike the other two, this one didn't just end with Francine passing. No, this time it was taken a step further when the killer dropped the baseball bat and pulled out a Bowie knife, and then watched as the knife was embedded to the hilt into the middle of Francine's chest and was dragged downward. At about the navel region, the knife was pulled out and reinserted, sliding across her stomach lengthways and intersecting with the first one to form a giant inverted cross in her body. I saw the hands then dip one finger into the stream of blood that began running down from her navel and draw some sort of mark on her forehead. I didn't get a chance to see what it was, though, before I was brought back to the real world. I was awakened by my mother shaking me awake. "Susan!" she cried. My eyes snapped open and I shut upright in my bed, hyperventilating again. Susan, calm down, breathe." I couldn't. "Breathe," she repeated. "It's okay, honey. It's okay." I looked at her, gasping frantically. I stuttered. I didn't know what to say, what to do. I felt like my heart was less than 2 seconds from bursting. Every thought and emotion imaginable was sent zipping through my head, actually making me feel a bit dizzy. My eyes began burning with tears, and soon I was huddled in my mother's arms, crying like I was 5 years old again. She just held me. "Shh, it's okay," she said softly. "What happened?" "I don't know," I bawled. She was beaten to death." Her eyebrows raised in confusion. "She?" "Yeah, Francine Simmons. She was hanging from a tree and..." I was interrupted by a knock from the front door. Mom got up and went to answer the door, leaving me on the bed, quivering. I sat rigid, stiff, cycling through, or at least attempting to cycle through, all of the questions worming in and out of my head simultaneously. The first, and I guess the biggest, being, what the fuck was even going on? Who was this person and why were they doing this? Why was I seeing it? How was I seeing it? Actually, I take back what I said about what's going on being the biggest question. Thinking on it again, I think my biggest question at the time was if what I was seeing was even real, or if I was really just suffering from the worst, most vivid and fucked up nightmares I'd ever had in my entire life. I think even then, a part of me was sitting there on my bed praying to God that really was the case. That none of this was real, and that maybe I just needed a psychiatrist or something, right? Well, of all my burning questions, this was the only one I got an answer for almost immediately. "Susan?" my mother called out from the living room. Slowly I broke from my entropy and shambled from my bed out into the living room. There, standing in the doorway, was Mum and 2 police officers. I froze at the threshold where the hallway meets the living room. My heart was immediately sent into a tailspin. What's going on? Why are the cops here? "Susan, honey," Mum asked, sounding pretty nervous, if not shaken herself. "These 2 gentlemen say they need to speak to you." I didn't move. I just stood, my knees shaking violently. "Miss, we just need to ask you a few questions about where you were last night," one of the officers stated. "But what do you mean? I was here at home." The other officer piped up, sounding like he was eager, a little too much so. "Anybody able to vouch for that?" "No." My teeth clenched. I looked to Mom, who looked more and more anxious herself by the second, and added, "But I promise I was." The first officer nodded. His face remained concentrated. I wasn't sure whether his silence meant he was actually believing me or if he was just letting me think he did. Well, at any rate, I couldn't just sit there and continue being interrogated anymore and not at least know what the hell for. "What's going on?" I asked. "Did something happen?" "When was the last time you saw Daniel Rudd?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. I could tell he was gauging me. "Last night at the varsity football game." "Did you see him leave?" I shook my head in response. "Did you know of anybody else he may have been with at the game?" "No, he was alone." His eyebrow raised at me then. Oh, I'd answered wrong, to him anyways. "Really? No one else at all?" he asked, now sounding very much accusatory. "Yeah," I exclaimed. "He wasn't with anyone else last night, at least not that I saw." "Okay, well, what's this about?" Mum chimed in, finally. "An eyewitness said that they saw your daughter with Daniel around the time of his disappearance." He then looked at me. "And that little stunt of yours earlier at the schoolhouse makes me believe there's more to the situation than you might be telling us here." "Like what?" I asked defensively. The hothead partner chimed in once again. "Like where you've got him." He then narrowed his eyes at me. Let me guess, you dumped his body in the cafeteria at the schoolhouse where we found him, and then when you realized we'd be there, you decided to come in looking all like a big shot so you could draw our eyes off you, right?" "What?" my mother exclaimed. "What the fuck are you talking about?" "That's enough," ordered the other officer. He tossed his keys to his partner and ordered him to go wait in the car before turning back to us. "I apologize for that, ma'am. Kid's just out of training. Still hasn't got out of the shoot first, ask questions later phase." "Okay, apologies accepted, but I think it's time you left," Mum said, noticeably irritated. I could tell from her clenched teeth that it was everything she could do not to absolutely lose it with this officer. He nodded his head respectfully towards her. "I understand, ma'am, but I would like to ask you to keep in touch." He handed Mom a card before then turning to me. "And you, young lady, might want to be careful. Now, my partner was out of line with the way he spoke to you, but he does have a point. It doesn't look good trying to impede an investigation like that." Mum said to him, gesturing toward the door. He nodded toward her again and was turning to leave when I stopped him. "Wait," He stopped and turned back to me. Is it true? You actually found him? My breathing became heavy again. If so, then that means... His face stiffened and he nodded toward Mom and said, "Okay, keep in touch." And after that, he finally left. Well, my mouth dropped. Mom came over and wrapped her arms around me. "Are you okay?" she asked as tenderly as she could, a hint of aggravation still not having dissipated. I just stared forward, unable to even make eye contact with her. "Susan?" Well, I snapped and looked at her. Yeah, I don't know." My head was spinning far too quickly for me to keep up. "Honey, what were they talking about with you being at the schoolhouse today?" I sighed and told her the truth, that I was trying to look for him after I'd seen on the news that he was missing. Obviously, I didn't mention the whole "I saw him get stabbed to death while in the bathtub" part. Well, not only did I know that she wouldn't believe that, but I still wasn't sure I did either, despite being all but directly told that it was true. She just hugged me close then. "I'm sorry, honey. It's going to be okay." I just stood there stiff in my mother's arms for what felt like hours. I don't really know whether it was because of the shock that I'd just been told that my crush was found murdered, the fact that I'd seen it happening, but didn't or couldn't do anything about it, or the fact that, deep down, a part of me knew that it wasn't long before I'd hear the same thing had happened with Sarah and Francine. But my head went completely blank. I remember I stayed like this for a good few days after, too. I basically went through almost the next week and a half, completely blank, mindless, emotionless, and just generally absent from life as a whole, both at home as well as school or anywhere else. Danny's murder was on the front page of the paper the next day, as well as the morning news. At school, it was all anybody could talk about. Whispers started going around that it was some random dude stalking the school Friday night who'd managed to snag Danny while no one was around. Of course, the more serious ones started speculating the killer was someone from the school. This led to a handful of witch-hunting groups being formed that went around interrogating anybody that was unlucky enough to come into their crosshairs. By the end of the week, so many damn fights had broken out and kids being jumped, both of which resulted in numerous hospitalizations, that the school was forced to shut down for the next week. Throughout this period of time, outside of one chance encounter with one of the leaders of one of these bands of idiots, Clarence Gorman, who, funnily enough, happened to be Francine's boyfriend, foreshadowing's a bitch, ain't it? I'd managed to pretty much fly completely unnoticed. They didn't get rough with me either. I guess, despite the fact that my crush on him was at the time kind of a well-known thing, they figured I was either way below his league, in other words, not really worth his time talking to, or that I was just generally too timid to be considered a suspect for something like this. Like I said, though, none of that really seemed to matter to me in any real way. Instead, I simply went through every day in a trance. What was worse was that all of what had happened was affecting me even more at night time. It got to a point where, due to not being able to sleep out of fear that I was going to see someone else getting mauled, I was actually beginning to hallucinate. During the next week-long shutdown of the school, Mum took me to see a counsellor after noticing that I'd not slept for, by that time, 5.5 days straight. There wasn't much for it. Hell, what was some shrink gonna do? Tell me I was going nuts? Maybe tell me that I was losing it because of the worry over Danny's death, and that was causing me to fantasize that Sarah and Francine were dead too. I figured, if nothing else though, I might be able to get put on some pills or something, and then whatever was causing me to see any of this stuff would stop, right? Well, that's sadly not what happened. Yeah, I told them what had been going on, the shit I'd been seeing, and yeah, I got put on some prescription pills, but no, they didn't do a damn thing. I found this out that Wednesday night when, as I was actually sitting down to eat supper, it started again. Well, this time it started differently, with whoever it was just following behind somebody else. Like the other times, this was yet another abrupt shift from reality. Seriously, 1 minute I'm looking at my bowl of lasagna and the next I'm going down a dimly lit street, looking at some random stranger's back. This time the unsuspecting victim was someone I didn't recognize offhand. The kid was young, around my age. Other than that, though, I had no idea who this person was or why they were being selected to be killed. Well, of course, it wasn't like I was given any kind of reason as to why the others had been killed either. This went on for about a minute or two, with the killer quietly skulking behind this kid, before the kid was then joined by 3 others in a cul-de-sac. Of the trio that was gathered around, one of them I did recognize. It was Clarence. They had gathered at the cul-de-sac and Clarence was holding a basketball, about to start dribbling, when he pointed behind the kid to the person who'd been following. I couldn't hear him, but I could see Clarence point and move his mouth, probably asking something along the lines of, "Who the hell are you?" Whatever he said, though, it didn't matter because in the span of less than 2 seconds, I could see the killer break into a sudden sprint, pouncing and going full throttle on Clarence, grabbing his throat and repeatedly driving the back of his head into the asphalt. While the others tried to force the killer off, only to be shoved or even thrown away. By the time they were finally satisfied, Clarence's face was hardly even recognizable as a person, much less as Clarence Gorman. Just like with Francine, it didn't end there, with Clarence's death. Oh, I saw the killer's hand dab its index finger in the blood that began pooling around his head, before then drawing another symbol or something like what had been done with Francine. This time, though, the vision lasted just long enough for me to see what it was that they'd scrawled in the blood, causing my heart to stop cold. It was my initials. There was no mistaking it. It was written in the same pseudo-cursive style I use when signing my initials, having never actually mastered cursive writing, but still wanted to look fancy. Mum had always teased me about it, calling it redneck cursive. Not only that, but they even added the little heart I always drew next to my initials as well. Now, I was horrified. What the fuck? Who is this? How do they know my name? And how can they copy my handwriting perfectly like this? Why are they doing this to these people? People I know. When I came back to reality this time, I began screaming, going into a full psychotic episode. It was so bad that I even began trying to tear my hair from my scalp. Mum actually had to pin me to the floor and restrain me until I eventually calmed down and just began bawling. She asked, frightened and almost at her wit's end like I was, what had happened. I tried as best I could to tell her what I'd experienced, but it was clear she wasn't exactly buying it. I don't think she thought I was just trying to get her attention or anything like that, but I could tell she wasn't taking well with the "I watched another kid from school get killed" story either. I didn't know what to do. I wanted all of this to stop, but how was I supposed to do that? How, if I couldn't tell who it was that was doing this? Obviously, though, the biggest questions were still, why was I having to see this? How was I seeing it from their perspective? That morning, we visited the psychiatrist, where he and my mother then spoke in private for the entire half hour, before it was then apparently decided that the best thing for me was to spend some time in an inpatient program. They apparently thought that some time away from everything that was going on in town would help to get rid of the visions by cutting out the excess stress, to quote the shrink. I didn't bother fighting. I knew it wouldn't do fuck all in that regard, but at least there I couldn't hurt myself or continue dragging my mother down with this. By the end of that week, I was moved into the facility. It was one of those that looked like a, albeit well kept and sanitized, group home or sort of halfway house. Along the walls and the hallways were all sorts of cheesy inspirational posters and some different papier-mâché crafts peppered across going all the way down. I spent the better part of a month there at first. During that time, things were quiet. No visions, no friends and classmates being murdered, and no freakouts. Staff and counsellors there, though, not understanding what I was talking about when I tried to explain to them what had been going on, were still super nice and helpful with me. and with things being as quiet as they'd been for the time, I thought everything was finally over. That I really was just overly stressed or whatever, and that I'd be able to go back home and everything would be okay. Then, in that last week, just a few days before I was supposed to be released, I saw the newspaper headlines with the discoveries of both Sarah and Francine's bodies. Both articles listed them as having been dead for weeks, close to 2 months when they were found. That was when, about midday that same day, the police came to the institution to question me. Unlike before, they seemed keen on the idea that I was the one doing it, even if they weren't quite as direct in their accusations like the one had been before. Well, I could still tell, and, well, could I really blame them? It was my initials on the bodies, signed, sealed, and delivered. But even still, it wasn't me. I wasn't doing anything to anybody. Was I? At any rate, I told them as much, and eventually they let me go. They of course told the supervisor at the institution to keep a close eye on me before leaving, which resulted in them restricting the time I was allowed to spend out of my room. Not that I really left much anyways, but still, it was annoying as hell to have to be followed even more constantly than I already was by one, well, not one, but 3 supervisors, just to use the frickin' bathroom. I guess, aside from the initials and the fact that the victims were people I knew, they had no actual evidence to tie me as the culprit. At the same time, that was little consolation, if any. Sure, I wasn't walking out in handcuffs yet, but that didn't mean I was out of the woods. No, not by a long shot. Whoever it was still out there, and I had not even the remotest freaking clue who it was and how or why it was using my name. And what's worse, I still wasn't any closer to knowing how I kept seeing these people being butchered. I think that was my biggest source of insomnia fuel. The fact that some sick, unknown freak was out there doing this shit to people I knew, people I cared about, using my identity, and all I could do was sit and watch them do it. Well, I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't take not being able to sleep. I couldn't take the looming fear that I might get imprisoned for murders I knew for a fact I hadn't committed, and most of all, I couldn't take not knowing if or when, or why for that matter, I was going to see another innocent person get killed. I was done with everything. I planned to do it at supper time that night. Use the cutlery they gave us, even if it was all plastic. Yes, I put the fork and knife through both my eyes, hopefully reaching the brain, and it would all be over. It would end that night there and then, one way or another. I sat down with my meal tray and took a quick glance around. No one was watching. I knew I'd have to be quick though, as that wasn't going to stay the case for long. I clutched the cutlery and brought it up to my face. Right. Just one quick Susan? I snapped up, startled. It was Mom. She'd come with a bag of food from Burger King. Hey, honey, she said in a sad tone, like she was visiting me in the hospital on my deathbed. Yeah, apparently irony's a bitch too. I brought you a Whopper combo, your favorite. I thought I'd join you for supper tonight. I looked at her, tears starting to sting in my eyes. I wanted to be happy. Hell, she was right. She did bring my favorites. BK had been my go-to any time I was asked where I wanted to go for dinner. Not only that, but she was there. I guess it's just natural even when you're all but grown like I was. Yeah, I still needed my mama. But at the same time, I wanted it to all be over. I needed it to all be over. But I couldn't now, not with her there. So eventually the dam broke and I just devolved into a sobbing mess at the table. Oh, honey, Mom cooed softly, her own voice starting to break. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. Mama's here. We'll get through this. I just cried pitifully into her arms. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout. Hell, I had more than half a mind to get up on the table, strip, and start shouting to the world that no, things weren't going to be okay, that someone was forcing me to watch people get murdered, and that there wasn't a goddamn thing I could do about it. But I knew, what good was that going to do me? Well, they hadn't believed it so far, and now I was quietly being investigated by the police. What was the point then in trying to get through this? One way or another, I'm just going to end up behind some set of bars. Mum and I sat there for the remaining 45 minutes in mostly silence. She tried to engage with me, sure, asking me if I was getting along okay enough here, and if the staff were nice, and if I'd made any friends. She tried, but I couldn't have cared less. I just nibbled at my burger like a mouse, coldly staring out about 1,000 miles past the wall behind her. The time rolled around to leave the mess hall and go back to our rooms for the night. One of the supervisors came to escort me back to the room when my mum left. Walking back to my room, I remember trying to plot another way of trying to end it when it happened. And this time I was immediately thrown into hysterics. For one thing, unlike all the other times where I couldn't tell where it was taking place, this was all too clear to me. It was happening right here, in the institution. It was in the mess hall, focusing on my mother, who was headed towards the door into the main hallway. Oh, dear frickin' God. No, Mom! I remember I was shrieking and howling as this happened. I felt rough hands grabbing my arms, trying to hold me still and lead me to my room. No, I remember screaming. Let me go, let me go. You frickin' pigs, God damn it, you have to let me go. I continued to watch as they moved in quickly on my mother, ambushing her. She spun around just in time for me to see the look of shock and panic wash across her face, for her face was cracked against the door behind her. I then watched her unconscious body be dragged across the floor towards the kitchen area. Inside, I saw two of the cooks attempt to rush the killer, only to be thrown aside, with one even having a bread knife get embedded in his shoulder for his troubles. The attention then returned to my mother's body as she was dragged further toward the back, until stopping in front of one of the deep fryers. Mother was slowly stirring awake as the killer began lifting her off the ground. In my frenzy, I managed to send my head back, cracking my supervisor straight in his nose, busting it wide open. This caused him to let go of me, and I took off like a bat straight out of hell to the mess hall. Because I was still seeing through the killer's eyes, it was damn near impossible for me to make it back down the hallway without slamming into the wall like I was a bumper car. Fortunately, I still knew how to make it back down to the mess hall from where I was, as my room was just a few rooms down from the one I slept in. I finally flew through the doors into the mess hall and sprinted in the kitchen, right as Mum's horrified face was plunged into the scalding hot grease. "Let her go!" I screamed. I saw the killer's view peek around the corner to see me, standing at the opening of the kitchen. That's when my own sight returned. With this, though, I felt my head start pounding, like I'd just been cracked over the head with a hammer. Around the corner, I watched a figure. The killer also clutched their forehead like they were in pain too. I looked closer, and my jaw fell. What the No. No, that's not possible. That isn't... But it was. It was me. I was looking at myself. I was looking through myself. What? Who are you? You, it said, sounding exactly like me. You, Susie. I'm you. I began touching my face. This thing, this other me, had paper white skin and no eyes, instead having two red X shapes over the skin where her eyes should have been. What are you talking about? I asked, now just as much confused, actually just as lost as I was panicked. She just tilted her head to the side, pointing to her left temple. I'm you. I've always been you. I'm the little birdie in your head that screamed to be let out. I'm the one that's always pushing you to do what needs to be done." "What do you mean? Do what? To who?" She then pulled my mother's body from the grease. She wasn't moving. Other me threw her to the ground in front of me. Her face was now peeling away all over like it was paper, revealing layers of meaty sinew underneath. My stomach turned over, bile rising up to my throat. That's what should happen to all of them. They don't believe you, they never will. They don't believe what we're capable of, what you're capable of. They just look at you and say, she can't do anything about it. They scoff and say that you're too innocent. She looked down at Mum's body and grinned, revealing teeth that were exactly like mine, including the braces I had back then. "Well, how's this for too innocent, huh?" I retched and looked into her eyes. "You're a freak," I shouted. "I'm a freak?" she retorted sarcastically. "I'm just you, Susan. I'm just a part of you. A part of you that you've kept buried, thinking you could keep me like that forever so you could keep being a soft little bitch. Everyone has one. It's a part of everyone from the time they were born. There's always been a me inside of them." "You killed my friends. For what? Because you could?" Her grin fell then. "Friends? You really don't know, do you? You actually thought those cunts were your friends. You thought they cared about you. Wait, what do you... Think about every time you've been hanging around with them, or tried to. Think about every time you turned your back on any one of them and listened because they thought you couldn't hear them." I paused at this, and my breathing slowed. "Look at her," they say, laughing. "You sure we have to invite her? Oh, we should find a new table away from her, you know." I began concentrating. I didn't want to, but something was gnawing at me now. A sort of knee-jerk reaction almost, spurred on by what other me was suggesting. Because of this, things I honestly didn't think I'd noticed before started being made clear to me. I started thinking about the looks I'd get in the hallway at school. The "look at Miss Good Girl" look. The look that said they barely tolerated me. I started hearing the whispers coming from seemingly nowhere, yet at the same time I knew it came from them, my peers, my friends. I could hear them talking about how they wished that girl would go away, how they were just fine until that girl showed up and made everything boring. It was always a subconscious thing for me before, thinking I was being paranoid, you know. That they weren't talking about me, right? Right? Well, they were. They were talking about me. I'm that girl. "Hey, get the picture now." Her voice brought me crashing back. They weren't your friends. They tolerated you so they wouldn't have to be the bad guys. They put up with you being around them so they could keep lying to you, the rest of the world, and even themselves, the same way you're trying to do now, by saying that you're a better person. Let me be the first to be honest with you, the way I have been all your fucking life while you've tried to ignore me. No one is truly a better person. No one truly gives a damn whether you're alive or dead. Or they might shed a few tears, actual tears, over you when something happens, sure, whatever, but it won't last. And those are just the better ones you keep wanting to run your mouth about. The majority. She waved her hand around the room. We'll just keep walking, not remembering or having a single care in the world that you're not around. I was speechless. My body was a statue, with my mouth dropped wide open. I had no way to retort. I mean, hell, she went on. Remind me of what you were going to do before Mommy Dearest here came in. I looked down at her, tears burning in my eyes once more. I was... A lump formed in my throat. I was going to end it. And why was that? Why were you so ready to go if people actually cared like you say they do, huh? I kept looking at Mom now. Crickets. Oh, I hear nothing but crickets. And you want to know? No, you're wrong, I said, interrupting her. You're wrong. She was there. She wanted to be there. She was trying to make me happy. She just wanted to cheer me up because of what you've been doing. Her face fell further. Her appearance of control was gone now. Yeah, but what about them? I spat. I could feel determination welling up inside me now. So they were fake. So they only put up with me to make themselves look better. So what? That's them. I looked once more to my mother. She always had my back, even if no one else did. And you just murdered her. You. I'm not like you, not at all. I don't care if you are from my subconscious or whatever. I stand with what I said. I am nothing like you. For a moment she just stood there, noticeably trembling. Her neck twitched more and more violently. My own body tensed up. I was ready for her to, at any second, leap at me to attack. Suddenly, however, she stopped, relaxing her body, and just smiled before vanishing into thin air. I started to look around for her before then dropping down to feebly try to check my mother for any kind of life. Nothing. No breath, no pulse, nothing. She was gone. I burrowed my face into her chest, and I just began sobbing. I'd failed. Mom, my own personal cheerleader, my one true friend, was gone. She'd saved my life, only to have to pay with hers. No, worse. She'd saved my life just for hers to be taken by me. Even if it wasn't actually me, it was still my face she would see before being forced into the oil. Not only that, but whether I liked it or not, deep down, far deep below even the darkest parts of my mind and my heart, I knew other me was right. She has, and always had been, a part of me, something I kept buried for so long that, eventually, it forced its way up and out, even finding a way of taking a mind and form of its own face, one that showed how ugly both it and I was at the same time. Soon I was being hoisted off of my mother by staff and police who'd been called by one of the cooks who'd managed to limp away and call 911. That night I was arrested for the murders of both my mother and the cook who got the bread knife lodged in him. The trial went on for almost a month and a half, and during this time they even tried bringing the previous murders into question, only for them to be deemed ultimately inadmissible in my trial, due to lack of evidence that I was the culprit. To this day, their cases still officially remain unsolved. Regardless, I still got what, I guess you could say, was coming to me. Thanks to the attorney my mother always had for me and her in case of any legal matters, notably when I was younger with the custody battles with my father, I was able to plead insanity and have my sentence reduced from 30 years in prison to 25 in a mental institution. That said, it wasn't any sort of cakewalk from there. The new facility was nothing like the one I was at before. Instead of the brighter, more welcoming environment I'd been in, everything now looked a lot more dull and lifeless. The staff were also a lot less friendly and inviting than what I'd been used to before. They weren't outright mean or abusive or anything, but they always just looked blankly at me, like they barely noticed I was even there. Almost like they didn't care. It's been almost 6 years now since this all happened, and I've been here, in this place ever since. Because I'm considered too dangerous to myself and others, I'm not allowed outside except to be escorted by 2 armed security guards to the cafeteria and to the restroom. I'm also not allowed cutlery, nor am I allowed pencil and paper. However, after good behavior and the shrink's orders, I was allowed to type this out here. They feel that reaching out might make it easier to reintegrate back into the world, or something like that, without having to actually be near somebody. I doubt that, though. I honestly doubt I'll ever be able to be out there again like I was. You see, I'm scared now. is because of an ingrained feeling that other me was even able to exist in the first place. Just like she'd said, she was a part of me. And everyone has one just like her. A part that they try to keep buried and forget about. A part that you may not even realize is there until it eventually crawls its way up and forces itself out of you, taking on a form and identity you've never seen before, and yet at the same time is only a reflection of you. I'm afraid, because of what I may find lurking inside me. I'm afraid of looking through its eyes again and seeing what I truly am on the inside. Well, there you go, my dear friends. That's your Friday evening's entertainment. And I just want to say a big gracias to all the Spanish students I've been teaching for the last couple of weeks. It's been a lot of fun, and really enjoyed the classes we've had. Hope it was fun for you and that you actually learned something while you were here as well. So you're continuing next week. Like I said, I'm going to pop in and say a proper goodbye to you all before you go back to Spain. Well, that meant nothing to the rest of you, so thanks a lot for listening. That was another Corpse Child story right there. Don't know how this wonderful author keeps churning these out, but another brilliant one. So that's it for your Friday evening's entertainment. Back again on Sunday with probably more Operation Apple Tree. Getting closer and closer to the end of that one now. It's about time, isn't it? And then I can get back to some of the other serials that I've been neglecting for way too long. Oh yeah, waffling again. So, many thanks for listening again, as always, and till the next time, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.